called the Bancor, with a global central bank to administer the currency. The report is dated April 13th, 2010. And no, unfortunately, this is not just a bad rumor. This is a deadly serious proposal and an official document from one of the most powerful institutions in the world. Do you see where this is all heading? As Brazilian economist and strategist Ricardo Amaral wrote recently, the US dollar served its purpose since the end of World War II and became the major foreign exchange reserve currency. But the days of the US dollar playing that special role has reached the end of the line, since today that system is very sick and is dying a slow death. Mr. Amaral added that we will soon see the major collapse of the US dollar, creating the biggest international monetary crisis the world has ever seen. This is why gold and silver prices are soaring. It's not a matter of if the US dollar will lose its status as the world's reserve currency. It's simply a matter of when. Investors know there are serious problems with the US dollar, so they are fleeing to precious metals, which have historically been very reliable when a country has major currency problems. It's not hard to see why people are no longer accepting US dollars, why many foreign countries are pushing for a new world reserve currency. The good news is, no matter what happens, I found several ways for you to protect your savings. And you could potentially even make 3 to 5 times your money over the next few years. I'll show you exactly what to do in a moment. But first, let me explain why the collapse of the dollar as the world's reserve currency could happen much sooner than most people expect. I know many of my friends, colleagues, and family members are still in serious denial. In the world of psychology, they call this the normalcy bias. You see, the normalcy bias actually refers to our natural reactions when facing a crisis. The normalcy bias causes smart people to underestimate the possibility of a disaster and its effects. In short, people believe that since something has never happened before, it never will. We are all guilty of it. It's just human nature. The normalcy bias also makes people unable to deal with a disaster once it has occurred. Basically, people have a really hard time preparing for and dealing with something they have never experienced. The normalcy bias often results in unnecessary deaths in disaster situations. For example, think about the Jewish populations of World War II. As Barton Biggs reports in his book, Wealth, War, and Wisdom, by the end of 1935, 100,000 Jews had left Germany, but 450,000 still remained. Wealthy Jewish families kept thinking and hoping that the worst was over. Many of the German Jews, brilliant, cultured, and cosmopolitan as they were too complacent. They had been in Germany so long and were so well established, they simply couldn't believe there was going to be a crisis that would endanger them. They were too comfortable. They believed that Nazis' anti-Semitism was an episodic event and that Hitler's bark was worse than his bite. They reacted sluggishly to the rise of Hitler for completely understandable but tragically erroneous reasons. Events moved much faster than they could imagine. This is one of the most tragic examples of the devastating effects of the normalcy bias the world has ever seen. Just think about what was going on at the time. Jews were arrested, beaten, taxed, robbed, and jailed for no reason other than the fact that they practiced a particular religion. As a result, they were shipped off to concentration camps. Their houses and businesses were seized. Yet most Jews still didn't leave Nazi Germany because they simply couldn't believe that things would get as bad as they did. That's the normalcy bias, with devastating results. We saw the same thing happen during Hurricane Katrina. Even as it became clear that the Levy system was not going to work, tens of thousands of people stayed in their homes directly in the line of the oncoming waves of water. People had never seen things get this bad before, so they simply didn't believe it could happen. In Haiti, in Pakistan, and other third world countries, sure, but they never thought something like that could happen in our country. And as a result, nearly 2,000 residents died. Again, it's the normalcy bias. We simply refuse to see evidence that's right in front of our face because it is unlike anything we have experienced before. The normalcy bias kicks in, and we continue to go about our lives as if nothing is unusual or out of the ordinary. Well, we're seeing the same thing happen in the United States right now. We have been the world's most powerful country for nearly 100 years. The US dollar has reigned supreme as the world's reserve currency for more than 50 years. Most of us in America simply cannot fathom these things changing. But I promise you this, things are changing, and faster than most of us in America simply cannot fathom these things changing. But I promise you this, things are changing, and faster than most people realize. For a moment, just look at a tiny fraction of the evidence around us. Did you know that there are now nearly 42 million Americans on food stamps? That's nearly 13% of the entire population. Those numbers are up 17.5% from last year, and the number of Americans on food stamps has gone up every month for 19 months. Can a country really be in good shape when 13% of the population can't even afford to buy food? Or how about this? Although it's gone almost completely unreported in the mainstream press, a dozen or so cities across the nation, like Fresno, Sacramento, and Nashville, have hundreds of people living in modern-day Depression-era shantytowns. The Fresno shantytown has received the most publicity after a visit by Oprah Winfrey. There, about 2,000 residents are homeless. They even have a security desk at the shelter because the encampment has gotten so large. City officials say they have 3 major encampments near downtown and smaller settlements along 2 local highways. Also, according to a recent article on MSN Money, about 43% of American families spend more than they earn each year. Look at this chart. It's unbelievable. The average household carries $8,000 in credit card debt, and personal bankruptcies have doubled in the past decade. How in the world can we possibly spend our way out of the current crisis? We certainly can't do it with savings. The only answer is to print more money, which will hasten the fall of the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency. There's simply no one better at bending statistics than the U.S. government. Take the unemployment rate, for example. Back in the 1930s, anyone without a job but not retired was considered unemployed. Today, however, the government calculates unemployment mainly by counting the number of people receiving unemployment benefits. So, when people's benefits expire, they are no longer counted, and the unemployment rate actually falls. Ridiculous, I know. The reality is, the true unemployment rate is much higher than what the government is reporting. If you don't believe me, look at 2 recent job postings I read about last week. In Long Island City, an estimated 2,000 people waited in line at the local employment office, some for as long as 4 days, to apply for 100 elevator mechanic apprenticeship positions. And in Massillon, Ohio, 700 people recently applied for a single janitorial job, paying $16 an hour plus benefits. The point is, our country is not growing jobs because the government makes it harder and harder for businesses. With current regulations in place, our country will never experience the type of growth necessary to dig our government out of the hole they've put themselves in. I'm sure you think I'm exaggerating, but just look at what the CEO of one of America's most important companies said a few weeks ago. Intel CEO Paul Otellini said in a recent speech, "I can tell you definitively, it costs $1 billion more per factory for me to build, equip, and operate a semiconductor manufacturing facility in the United States." He said that 90% of the additional costs are not from higher labor rates, but from higher taxes and regulatory charges, which other nations simply don't impose. Cypress Semiconductor CEO T.J. Rogers agreed that the problem is not higher U.S. wages, but anti-business laws. He was quoted in an interview with CNET News. The killer factor in California for a manufacturer to create, say, 1,000 blue-collar jobs is a hostile government that doesn't want you there and demonstrates it in thousands of ways. Few Americans today realize that we have the second highest corporate tax rate in the world. And since Japan's new prime minister announced that he plans to reduce the country's corporate tax rate by 15%, the U.S. will soon have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Why would anyone want to start a business here when they can do it for less money and keep more of the money they make by locating elsewhere? It's just another good reason to avoid the U.S. dollar. So is this. Did you know in 1979 there were 61 American companies that earned a top-level AAA credit rating from Moody's? Today there are only 4. Automatic Data Processing, Exxon, Johnson & Johnson, and Microsoft. Does this sound like an economic recovery to you? when only 4 companies in the entire country are stable enough to earn a AAA credit rating? It certainly doesn't to me, but it's nothing compared to what's going on in the housing sector. You want to know how crazy things are in the U.S. right now? Consider the bizarre state of the Las Vegas housing market, where the New York Times reports that building is booming again in a city where nearly 10,000 new houses are empty, thousands are in foreclosure, thousands of regular people have simply stopped paying their mortgages, and average prices are down more than 60% since 2006. What could possibly be driving this building mania? Well, it turns out that buyers don't want homes that were built during the boom because they sit in neighborhoods that look like ghost towns, and because many of these never-occupied houses are filled with cockroaches and other critters. So local builders are doing the worst possible thing they could be doing in Las Vegas right now. They're building more homes. Similar scenarios are taking shape in Phoenix and other U.S. cities. Of course, this might look good for economic numbers, but all it does is make the situation much, much worse in the long run. Want to see another crazy trick some businesses are using to artificially boost their earnings? This is just incredible to me. If you've been reading my work at all over the past few years, you know that I am extremely bearish on the for-profit education sector, such as the University of Phoenix. What could possibly be wrong with institutions that offer inexpensive education to tens of thousands of students across the country? Well, to me, it's just another symptom of how distorted and crazy our economy and our country have become. Here's what I mean. One of the crazy practices some institutions employ is to actually seek the enrollment of homeless people into their programs. You probably think I'm making this up, but Business Week recently ran a report on this practice. Why would they do this? Well, because these folks qualify for federal grants and loans that are used to pay college tuition fees. According to the reports I read, the University of Phoenix, for instance, relies on federal funds for more than 85% of its revenues. At another for-profit school, Drake College of Business, almost 5% of the student body at its Newark, New Jersey campus is homeless, Business Week reported. Of course, the majority of these students will never be able to repay their loans, but the colleges don't care. That's the government's problem, not theirs. Once again, it's the taxpayers like you and me who will be left holding the bag. And here's another good reason why investors are afraid of holding dollars right now. One of the most worrisome problems in the stock market is that we're basically repeating the exact same situation that occurred from 1937 to 1942. Most Americans think we've had this amazing stock market recovery since the financial crisis of 2008. And we have, to a certain extent, but we are not out of the woods. In fact, during America's last real economic collapse in the 1930s and 40s, we saw a similar drop and recovery before the markets crashed all over again. The situation is eerily similar. Look at this chart. It's one of the scariest I've seen in a long time. It shows an overlay of what happened to the stock market in 1937 compared to 2008. In both situations, we saw big crashes of about the exact same magnitude, and then a big recovery, again, of about the same size. But what will happen next? Well, if history is any guide, we could well have another big leg down in the stock market. That's exactly what happened 70 years ago. And with all the problems left unresolved in our economy today, it could certainly happen again, especially if the U.S. dollar loses its reserve status. As the Wall Street Journal reported, over the last year, the stock market has followed a path eerily similar to 1937. First, a strong, rapid run to a recovery high, same pace, same magnitude. Then a correction, again the same. Will we continue on the path that led to the correction of 37 into a collapse in 38? The point is, the cards are seriously stacked against us. This looming currency crisis is inevitable. Almost every state in the country is on the verge of bankruptcy. We have borrowed an impossible amount of money, which we will never be able to pay back. Our economy is an absolute mess. Taxes are sky high already, and will certainly go much higher over the next few years. And nearly all of the world's major financial players are preparing for an alternative to the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. To me, it is so obvious that we are about to experience a serious currency crisis that I can't believe people can deny this reality with a straight face. Again, if you don't believe a currency crisis is coming, just take another look at the price of gold and silver compared to the US dollar over the past decade. It's obvious that smart investors want to hold gold and silver, not U.S. dollars. Anyone with any sense or basic understanding of economics